So we are recording this as well for everyone. So we'll cover that in the housekeeping section. So to get started, thank you everyone for joining us. We're going to be talking today about community choice aggregation, what we're calling a path to energy independence. This is part of what's hopefully going to be a series of webinars done through the TCOG energy subgroup headed by Rod Howe, as well as cooperative extension, fossil free Tompkins. Today we're going to be hearing from myself. So I'm Terry Carroll. I'm a Clean Energy Communities Coordinator. I work for Cornell Cooperative Extension of Tompkins County. For those of you that are unfamiliar, the Clean Energy Communities Program is a NYSERDA program. So I work with municipalities across the southern tier, helping them understand their clean energy choices, whether it be clean energy, energy efficiency, renewable sightings. We help municipalities on all of those topics. So if you have any questions in regards to any of those things, feel free to reach out to me. You have my email address and my phone number right on the screen there, and I'm happy to answer any questions and help out any municipality. So, and then we also have Irene, and I'll let Irene introduce herself.
Great, thanks Terry. Hi, Irene Weiser here. I'm starting my third term as a council member in the town of Caroline. And I also, for more years than I care to count, have been the coordinator of Fossil Free Tompkins, which some people may be familiar with. We've worked around the county to advance a variety of energy issues, both getting to the point where we're using less fossil fuels and also pushing for renewable alternatives. What else do I want to say? So anyhow, I know what I wanted to say is that I've also previously both chaired TCOG and at the same time was also chairing, at that time TCOG had a working group on community choice aggregation that was intended to explore what is it. It was relatively new at the time, and so we explored it and concluded at the time that it wasn't a good fit. We'll talk more about that as the presentation gets underway, but just wanted you to know that that I've worn those shoes and been interested in watching CCA developments for a while. I also was on the statewide task force, I guess it was called, or something, to discuss CCA implementation and the kind of policy changes that need to happen to make it a more viable option. So that's me, and now it's back to you, Terry.
Awesome, thank you, Irene. So some quick Zoom housekeeping. I see that Mark has already raised his hand in chat. So this is a Zoom webinar. For those of you that haven't joined a Zoom webinar, it's a little bit different than a normal Zoom. You're not going to see each other. We're not going to have an open discussion. Essentially, it's all going to be done, through the chat interface. So, first off, this webinar is all being recorded. We're going to be sharing the slides after this. We'll also be sharing the presentation itself as a recording on our website. That's the link to the website. You'll be able to find this after the fact. But because we aren't having an open discussion about this, that means anything that you want to ask has to be done in the question and answer. So if you have something that's pertinent to this, actual presentation, a question about CCAs, about some of the slides, put them into the Q&A, and we're going to take questions at the end and try and answer them there. If there's something that's pressing about a specific slide, I'll try and keep an open eye on it. But hopefully we'll be able to answer all your questions. Theodora is going to be monitoring the chat as well. So Theodora is a colleague of mine at Extension. She'll be monitoring the Q&A in the chat and directing people to where the questions should go. So, chat if you have a question related to the presentation, a non-relevant points to that. If you aren't hearing us for some reason, definitely put that in the chat and we'll try and figure it out from there. So I saw Peter had his hand up as well. So Peter, if you have a question, feel free to put it into the chat or the Q&A, and we'll definitely try and answer that at that point. So without further ado, we'll jump right into this. So obviously the question is, what is CCA? What are we doing here? And CCA at its most basic level is essentially a bulk buying club for energy supply, electric and or gas. And typically in New York State, what we've seen is it's been more typically for electricity. So when we talk about energy supply and delivery, I think we need to get some background context right out in front of everyone. And so if you ever look at your NYSEG utility bill, and for the most part, everyone here is probably a NYSEG customer. Just about everywhere in the southern tier is on NYSEG, except for the municipal and rural power authorities. And so on the right, we have an example of a utility bill from NYSEG. And you'll see in that blue box, there's delivery charges, a section on delivery charges that's highlighted, and then a separate section on supply charges. And the reason that this exists is because in New York State, our electric utilities are decoupled from energy production. And so this happened, I believe, in the 80s, maybe it was in the early 90s. And so right now, our utility companies only deliver electricity. That means you as a NYSEG customer can decide where you're going to buy their electricity, where you're going to buy your electricity supply from. And just about 20% of people decide to buy it from an energy service company and or a solar farm. And so, you know, this is an important distinction to make because as we just said in the previous slide, you know, CCA is about the supply portion of the bill. So really we're just looking at that red box. We're not looking at delivery. You know, the utility company is going to continue to exist. You're still going to have interactions with the utility company. And so jumping this into it a little bit more, you know, for energy delivery, like I said, you're going to continue working with NYSEG. NYSEG, and the reason that is because you're still going to have to pay NYSEG for, you know, the maintenance of the wires and the pipelines, the poles. You're still going to see rate increases for operations and maintenance and improvements to their delivery infrastructure. And because of this, the NYSEG delivery rate increases will continue under CCA. And that's because the rate increases really are only affecting the delivery side of your bill. They're not affecting the energy supply. Now the energy supply, if you decide not to procure your own energy supply, you decide not to go with a solar farm or to go with an energy supply company, that means you're going to default to the energy supply that NYSEG procures for you. And when this happens, NYSEG goes out onto the open market, they secure the energy supply, be it electricity or gas on the wholesale market, and they deliver it to you. And if you look on your bill, and we can go back to this one here, you'll see that merchant function charge. And that merchant function charge is actually, you know, basically how they recoup a little bit of money in order to pay for that services. And it's supposed to not make them any profit on the supply side of it. Wholesale prices vary by time of day and time of year. And you can see this on the NYSEG website as well. And a lot of that has to do with a lot of factors that we're not going to go into today because we're going to try and keep this, you know, pretty basic to CCA, but it's something that we can talk about at a different time, especially as we get deeper into these conversations. So this is another electricity bill, but this time it's an electricity bill for a CCA customer. And so this is actually someone that's on a green CCA. So they're part of a CCA in the village of Owego, so just south of us in Tioga County. And you'll see slightly different from that previous bill that we showed. You're only going to see on that front page from NYSEG the electricity delivery charges, you know, just that blue box that we had previously shown. And then as you flip through, and if you have an energy supply company, you'll be familiar that your supply will be, you know, usually at the last page of your bill. And you'll see an example of that on the right-hand side of your screen, that picture right there. And it'll include, obviously, the price that you're paying, the taxes, et cetera. But you'll also see a message from your community choice aggregation, you know, not supplier, but your community choice aggregation program. In this case, it's a program that's run by Mega. We'll talk a little bit later about administrators. But what they're really talking to you about there is how they're offering you the benefits of, you know, competitive rates, supply price certainty, and in this case, the access to renewable electricity. So that's something that we'll get into further as we go along as well. So jumping back, you know, what is a CCA? So we covered the basics. At its most basic, bulk buying club for supply. But really, it's also can be about much more than just supply. It can include other energy services and programs. And that's something that Irene's going to dive into a lot more at a later point. But to give a little bit of the history of community choice aggregation, you know, this isn't something that's always been a thing. It's relatively recent here in New York State, at least. So back in April of 2016, the Public Service Commission put together an order and basically said that municipalities can now pass a local law, and that allows them to purchase the energy supply on behalf of their residents and small commercial accounts. This has to be done at the lowest level. So we're not talking about Tompkins County doing it for all of Tompkins County. We're talking about the village of Trumansburg doing it for the residents of the village of Trumansburg. We're talking about, you know, the city of Ithaca doing it for city of Ithaca residents, the town of Dryden doing it for town of Dryden residents, but the village of Dryden doing it for the village of Dryden residents. And so, you know, those are key things to think about. So it comes to an individual municipal decision that everyone's going to have to think about and decide whether it's right for their municipality or not. The other important thing to remember with community choice aggregation is that it's an opt-out program. This means that if your municipality passes a local law, goes through the entire process, and starts a community choice aggregation, you will be part of that aggregation unless you decide to opt out. Now, the opt-out is free. It will always remain free. That was part of the PSC order, but it does take a little bit of effort on your part. And there's pluses and minuses to that, of course. So this is a nice graphic that Irene and I found that we really like, that I think puts together what CCA is in a really visual aspect for people that like to see it that way. So, essentially the CCA is there to source your electricity. It's about buying and building electricity supply. That utility is going to continue to exist. They're going to be the poles and wires company. They're going to be how you get that, where you're getting it sourced from. That's how it's going to get to the customers. And then finally, the customers, you're going to be able to benefit from, hopefully affordable rates, local control, and increasingly, cleaner energy. And so where is CCA? So CCA started in California in the 1990s, and it slowly started to grow. And so you'll see on this, the states that are in green have already authorized it. The ones in, kind of that purplish color, pinkish color are those that are, considering it. And then you have Minnesota who's, considering it at a very basic, level. They've just started to investigate it. So hopefully we see more and more states start to adopt it. I think if you look at the states that are probably this is the most active in, California, hugely into this. Large swaths of the state are already under CCAs. And then Massachusetts increasingly is starting to see a lot more CCAs develop there as well. In New York State, we have 61 municipalities that have created active CCAs. And those 61 municipalities encompass 170,000 different accounts. Now, that's slightly different than population, right? So an account can be in a household of 4 or 5 people. It can be a business. So when we're talking about, what's the population of a CCA, it's not 170,000. It's actually much larger than that. But it does cover 170,000 different accounts. And out of those 61, 38 have decided to go with renewable energy as their energy default supply. And so when we talk about CCAs, you'll often hear people say green CCAs or brown CCAs. The green CCAs are when people are talking about municipalities that have decided to opt into having renewable energy as their default, energy supply that's offered, that people have to then opt out of, or what people sometimes refer to as opting down from. And so you can, have energy, so, renewable energy be your default, and then you can also have, what people call a brown CCA, one that also includes fossil fuels, be kind of a secondary option that people can go into. In New York State, we have four current administrators that are working on this. Good Energy, Joule Assets, Mega, the municipal electric and gas lines that I think many of you will be familiar with. They started here in Tompkins County as a way to try and get cheaper energy for municipalities. So many municipal officials on this will certainly be aware of that. And then lastly, Westchester Power, which was the first of them and arguably the most successful. And so this is a snapshot from just about a year ago now of what CCA looks like in New York State. And so we have Westchester Power started in 2016 with the most amount of members by far, encompassing the most municipalities, and also the most municipalities that have defaulted to that 100% green, or what we call the green CCAs. And then you have 3 other administrators that started these aggregations just about last year, and a bunch of them are coming up on a year of existence. A lot of them started in July. So you have Mega with 21 municipalities, 37,000 different members. Joule Assets, 28,000 with 8 municipalities, and Good Energy with 5 municipalities and 7,100. So if you remember from the last slide, 61 municipalities are in an active CCA, but actually 80 of them are fully authorized to do these CCAs. And so we have a bunch that are, waiting. They're deciding whether they want to actually do a CCA, whether they're waiting for better pricing, or what, deciding whether they want to go the green CCA or the brown CCA route. So this is something that, 2 years ago you had 20. And now, we're up to 80, and I think it's something that you'll increasingly see growing in New York State. We've already heard of talks in Albany, Rochester, city of Syracuse, as well as a lot of the smaller municipalities scattered throughout New York State starting to consider CCA as well. And the reason for this is because NYSERDA is really pushing it. NYSERDA is really interested in starting to see municipalities go this route. They see it as a way to really demonstrate leadership when it comes to clean energy. And for that reason, it's part of the Clean Energy Communities program as one of the 10 high impact actions. And so, for them, they see CCA as, a way to allow local elected officials to choose the source of energy supply for their community. They see it as a way to, enter into these bulk purchasing arrangements that'll hopefully yield, somewhat competitive energy supply rates, hopefully save some people some money. And also, look at it as a way to really start to promote energy efficiency, clean energy, and some of these other things that a lot of people see as, a way to support a new, clean, green economy. When we talk about a Green New Deal, to me, CCA is really one of the ways that we get there. So, those are some really basics about CCA. And now I'll turn it over to Irene to start to talk about maybe some of the more exciting stuff. What is the potential of CCA?
Great, thanks, Terry. Thanks for that overview. This begins to outline, and Terry did a good intro to it, as to why I became interested and why I encouraged the TCOG committee to start looking at CCA a few years ago. Again, for those of you who joined a little bit late, I'll just say that we started looking into CCA back when there was really only one existing CCA. It was the Westchester Power Group at that point. But anyhow, what seemed really interesting and exciting about it is that, first of all, people could have a predictable energy supply cost. Instead of the vacillation in prices that Terry mentioned earlier, the rates would be stable because you'd engage in what's called a power purchase agreement, a contract with your energy supplier, and you'd negotiate what rate you would pay for that energy. So it would be predictable and known, and wouldn't vacillate with supply and demand and time of day and everything else. There's the possibility of purchasing 100% renewable energy supply, and because of the way that you need to promote CCAs within the community, there's an opportunity to educate and enhance the energy literacy within the community. There's a vision that some like to embrace of not just buying green energy from wind farms in South Dakota, but really to try and focus the green energy purchases from local or regional energy supply sources. And so that's thought to, potentially encourage more renewable energy in New York State, potentially, again, local or regional job creation, and also the potential to develop and support local energy services like our own local Heat Smart program or our electric vehicle programs, energy efficiency, heat pumps, energy storage could all be incorporated into programs that the CCA could develop over time. Additionally, there could be programs to support low-income residents and help them achieve energy equity and have opportunities within the renewable energy arena. And last, there's the potential to keep our energy investments local and to strengthen the local economy. And I think this is, as we're now in this COVID situation, and who knows where our or any other economy is going to end up as we work our way through this. I think that there's reason to think about CCA again, not only because of the Green New Deal that's being considered, but also because of the opportunities to strengthen our local economy. So what do I mean by that? What potentially happens? Terry, it seems like it's not changing when I press my button. Can you? Thank you. I'll just call out next from now on. So when we look at enhancing the local energy, local economy, it helps to just get an overview of how much electricity do we use. And this is a sketch. These are averages. There's more detailed studies that have been done by the county, but the average electric use in a home, at least when we look at putting solar panels on a home, we figure 700 kilowatt hours per month. There are 40,000 homes in Tompkins County. The average cost per kilowatt hour that we pay here is about a little less than 4 cents per kilowatt hour. I will note, and we'll come back to this, that that's a pretty low price relative to other places in the state. And anyhow, so we have 700 kilowatt hours a month times 12 months times 40,000 homes at just under 4 cents is almost $13 million a year that we spend on electric supply. And that money is leaving our community, 12 or $13 million a year. And truly it's more, because this doesn't take into account small businesses and large businesses. This is really just for the residences in Tompkins County. So it's a substantial amount of money that's leaving our community. And as I think about CCA, it makes me think, what if instead we owned and built and generated our own power? We own wastewater treatment plants and water treatment plants, and manage all of that internally. Can we do the same thing with our energy? Can we work to reduce demand and sell our excess energy back to the grid? Can we pay for the energy efficiency and heat pumps with the money we save and support our low-income residents and create community jobs and on and on? So it really, to me, seems like a very exciting possibility. Next, Terry. So here's where we're going to get a little bit, not deep, but a little bit more into the weeds about the history of CCA. And we're going to be reading this across the screen from left to right, not up and down through the columns, but we'll go row by row. I first want to say that all of these models of CCA were developed by a group called Local Power, with a man named Paul Fenn and his partner, Julia Peters. And they started CCA, as Terry said, back in California. They had lived out there. And they started that in the late 1990s, sort of following deregulation and the Enron crash and all of the craziness that was happening out in California related to energy. And the big goal back then was two things. One was to save money by allowing communities to issue RFPs to procure lower cost energy, but also green energy, by using something called RECs, which stands for Renewable Energy Certificates. And at the time, we were still relatively early in the days of renewable energy. RECs literally are just a market instrument, a certificate that you pay a little bit more for to certify that the energy you're using is green energy. And so the idea was to save the community energy, to buy renewable energy, and that's where CCA started. Paul and Julia then looked at what was happening with CCA, and they saw, this is good, but we could do better. What if we could procure the energy more locally and encourage more local renewable energy development? And so the goal then became, and the goal of CCA 2.0 became to find energy that was going to cost less or equal to the utility supply, with people who wanted to opt into brown energy for cheaper could do that, but really to help to promote regional green energy development and to promote plus or minus, people could or could choose not to develop some local energy programs and support those as well. Well, it's been a few years now since CCA 2.0 started happening out in California, and more recently here in New York State. And Paul and Julia are continuing to look and see where can we get to next, because it's still not achieving their vision. And one of the things that they've really wrestled with and thought about is that we need to do more than just save people money. And we can't always get rates that are competitive with what the utility rates are for supply. But the real money saving comes from reducing energy demand. As your home becomes more efficient, you use less energy and you save money. Plus, we really need to do that. We really need to save energy and reduce our demand on the system. And so there are many benefits to proceeding in that kind of direction. The other thing that they've looked at is really to put social and energy equity at the core of the CCA 3.0 vision. As we know, those of us who have looked into getting heat pumps and various other efficiency improvements, it's a reach, and it becomes even more of a reach for low-income households. And further, they wanted to see, rather than even regional green energy, which is often done by outside companies that come in and want to build larger scale solar farms or wind farms, that the CCA 3.0 model was really interested in doing locally built, locally owned, locally managed green energy and storage, keeping the job local and keeping the money in the community. So related to that, well, you know, we can go across and it becomes, the rest of this becomes a little easier to translate. The energy source for CCA 1.0, as we already indicated, is brown energy plus or minus green energy bought as RECs. And again, those could be RECs from a wind farm in South Dakota. The vision on CCA 2.0 has been RECs, again, plus an option for brown energy, but to encourage and to specify that the RECs come from New York State or even particular regions within New York State. And last, with CCA 3.0, again, locally owned site and locally sited green energy, regional and state RECs as a secondary option. There's a difference in the size of the aggregate. So remember, each community passes a local law, but then you get the bulk buying power when you bring many communities together into one RFP to procure the energy supply. And so CCA 1.0 being very focused on saving money and procuring lower cost energy. The more buying power you have, the more households and small businesses that you have enrolled, you know, presumably the better cost. So CCA 1.0 was really looking for large size aggregates. CCA 2.0 still, you know, well, you be the judge whether 75,000 is in your book large. To our thinking last time around, it did seem large. We were interested in something that really felt like more of a fit with Tompkins County and the idea of 20,000 to 50,000 households, which is, you know, now what we see for CCA 3.0. In terms of local control, you can probably surmise this from what I've already discussed, but with CCA 1.0, there was really, after the contract, the RFP is issued, there's not a lot of local control. You're purchasing energy supply from basically an ESCO, they send it to you and, you know, done. With CCA 2.0, there's some level of control, but, and certainly a bit more if you're doing local energy programs, but you don't have to do local energy programs, and depending on how the program is set up, you may or may not have a lot of local control. And again, by contrast, CCA 3.0, and I just want to emphasize, CCA 3.0, while it may be alluring, is not yet in existence, but this is the vision of it, is that it would be highly, a lot of local control, that it would be customized, flexible, using a cooperative, energy cooperative or consortium kind of model, and allowing for the consortium of communities to have a lot of self-determination in how it goes. The administration of a CCA, quite often with CCA 1.0 and 2.0, what you'll see is there's an outside, you know, as we saw before with Terry's slides, an administrator who helps to guide the communities and then also issues the RFP and, you know, helps to move the project forward. The vision with CCA 3.0, and I actually just had an email exchange with Paul and Julia today about it, is that they really see themselves not as consultants, well, perhaps as consultants, but not as the administrator. They really want the community to take ownership and control and vision, and they see their role as empowering the community to be able to administer their own program. The level of effort that's involved in CCA 1.0 is, and this is comparative. I don't want to imply that doing 1.0 or 2.0 doesn't take much. It's just as compared to some of the other models, that the level of effort for 1.0 is relatively less and relatively short term. To do a CCA 2.0, low to medium. There's a bit more homework, especially if you want to get involved doing local energy programs. And again, if you're doing local energy programs, and even if you're not, some degree of ongoing involvement is important. And with CCA 3.0, as you might surmise, there's more involvement, local involvement, and more figuring out and learning curve and everything else. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm just saying it's a thing. So comparatively more effort going in. The risks for both CCA 1.0 and 2.0 I've listed as moderate, and we'll see a bit more on this in the next slide. But the reason for that, and we mentioned a little bit about this before, is that the cost of supply, of energy supply that NYSEG delivers to us in this region of the state, for a variety of reasons, mostly because we have a lot of excess supply, is very low. It's the lowest supply cost anywhere in the state. And so finding something that will compete cost-wise to get cheaper energy or even equal cost to what the utility can provide us is a little bit, you know, it's marginal. Can we pull that off? So if your CCA model, as in 1.0 and 2.0, is built around the idea that you want
So it looks like Irene may have frozen. Sorry about that. Not really sure what's going on. At least she's frozen for Theodora and myself. I don't know if someone could just write in the chat if it looks like it's the same thing's happening for Pan. Oh,
I'm back. Where
she's
did
back? Okay, thanks, Irene.
where did
So
you lose me?
yeah, so part of the joys of doing, you know, the quarantine Zoom here, but yeah, we lost you for about a minute and a half, Irene.
Oh, well, so which thing was I talking about when I left off? Because in my world, I just kept talking through this whole.
I didn't catch exactly when you froze, so I think you know, maybe starting to talk about the transition. Risk. There you go. Thanks, Kirby.
That it was risk. So so this may or may not be a recap or new information. The risk that I see in CCA 1.0 and 2.0 and why I listed as moderate. Some of you will remember that Terry talked about earlier that the price of electric supply from NYSEG varies. It also, as was mentioned before, I think, is that it's very low. We have a lot of energy supply in this region of New York State. And so the supply cost that NYSEG is able to provide us with is hard to compete with, frankly. It may or may not be the case that we could procure cheaper energy from some other source. And so if you look at the goals of CCA 1.0 and 2.0, those are really built around the idea of procuring cheaper energy, or at least equal to the utility supply costs. And so the risk is whether or not you're able to achieve that in your RFP. On the other hand, CCA 3.0 sort of turns that model on its head in that it looks to save money not by getting cheaper supply costs, but by reducing the demand within an individual household. And as you become more efficient, you're spending less money on energy. And so it's a different model. It's new. It doesn't exist yet. And the other risk that's involved, and really, you know, I think part of this is any of these could be, you know, a little bit of effort to achieve. And it depends upon the tenacity and the creativity and the commitment of the community, I think, more than anything in CCA 3.0. If we were to take ownership in the way that is envisioned, it really depends on you know, go for it, and, you know, as we reach barriers, figure out ways through them kind of commitment to make 3.0 to realize that vision. And I don't know that it's for us. You know, we have to, as you know, as all of us, discuss it. So go ahead to the next one, Terry. So a couple of things here. So there are considerations when we're moving to the idea of CCA. We already mentioned that the CCA cost can exceed NYSEG supply cost. And you can see this in this graph to the right. The blue bars are the month-to-month variation in the supply costs from NYSEG. On the other hand, the green line, and if you can make it out, the black line as well, are the green and basic energy costs to the Westchester Power CCA. And so you can imagine that on months when the cost of NYSEG is less than the cost of the CCA, that you may have some customers who are unhappy or confused. What's going on? I thought my prices were going to be less. And the goal, of course, is that the average costs will be, you know, again, depending on your CCA model, but potentially less than what the utility supply costs are. So there are ways, as we've talked about, to reduce the cost to customers by efficiency and by demand response. Customers are going to have questions and concerns. They're going to be moving, or they want to opt in or out, or have questions about their bill. And so as you think about setting up a CCA, you also have to think about the local management that you want to have for ongoing outreach and communication with your community, and potentially for the programs that are developed in the community. And last, since we know that this ultimately rests on municipalities passing local laws and understanding this thing, utilities or municipalities and elected officials are going to want to understand what all is expected from the local government, and what level of effort and time is expected from them, or consultants, or, you know, volunteers from the community. And so all of those things need to be thought about and discussed if and when we move forward looking into CCA. Next, Terry. Thanks. So, so this identifies the various barriers that we encountered back in 2017 when we were looking into this. And at the time, there was no enrollment of low-income residents allowed into community solar farms. There were separate bills for supply and delivery. NYSEG wouldn't reimburse what's called a gross receipts tax, which is basically a sales tax on the service, the energy that they deliver, and they were not willing to do that for CCAs. You're not allowed to enroll CCA members into a community solar farm, and there was separate billing, and it had to be an individual by individual enrollment into a solar farm. And so we thought that was just crazy absurd. Here we were having these, you know, sizable solar developments proposed for the town of Dryden, that coincidentally, really, the two solar farms together, the one in Ellis Hollow and the one that was behind the cemetery, together would have supplied enough energy for 7,500 households. And coincidentally, that's about the number of households in the town of Dryden. So we thought, well, wouldn't it be cool if Dryden formed a CCA and enrolled everybody into these solar farms? Well, what we learned is that you can't, that it has to be person by person, and that anybody with low income couldn't enroll. And so that was very frustrating to learn. And also that not only would it be a separate bill for the CCA, but the solar farm would be yet again another separate bill. There were some policy hitches in New York State overall that were slowing down renewable energy development. The policy goes by the name of VEDR. It was the value of distributed energy resources. And it was something that at the time was really being sorted out and changed a lot, and nobody wanted to invest in renewable energy at the time because it was just going sideways. There were low supply costs in our region, which I've mentioned a few times now, so it's questionable. Can you save when we already have lower supply costs? And so that we thought that that made a higher risk. Of course, at that time, remember, 3.0 wasn't really on our radar. At the time, there was only one active CCA. That was the Westchester Power one, and they were just barely a year old, I think, at the time. So there were still a lot of unknowns on the effectiveness and potential of CCA. There was also a limited choice of consultants. And we didn't feel like we had the expertise within our community to do it by ourselves. The consultants charged an administrative fee on the kilowatt hour cost. And again, we were working with thin margins to begin with for the cost of supply in our region, and we weren't sure once we paid those administrative fees, would there be money left to hire a local coordinator and coordinate a community-based program. There's a lack of transparency with one consultant. We couldn't get answers until we signed up with them. They wouldn't tell us, you know, they gave us a little introductory blurb, but unless we engaged with them, they wouldn't answer additional questions. And the other consultant was taking a rather conservative approach, we thought, relative to our interests, which were much more in the direction of green energy, and they weren't really ready to venture in that direction. The consultants wanted large aggregates, whereas we wanted more local control and programs, again, that were more suited to the vision that the municipalities involved at that point wanted, which was towards the green energy leadings. The supply, and the focus was on supply costs, not on energy efficiency, demand response, energy storage, heat pumps. And we thought it was a heavy lift to enroll all of the municipalities in our county. I guess I didn't mention, I probably should, that the municipalities that were involved in this work group, and it was the town of Caroline, Danby, Dryden, the town and city of Ithaca, Cayuga Heights, and did I mention Dryden? Dryden.
Ulysses.
Oh, thank you, Terry, and Ulysses. So I knew I was missing one. Thanks. So that's who is involved in that work group, and you know, we looked at this set of barriers, and we just thought, not really sure that this is going to work for us right now. So your question probably is, what's changed? Why are we looking at it now? So next slide, Terry, and here's what's changed. It's certainly not perfect, but there are some changes that I think are significant. One of which is not on this slide, has to do, as I mentioned earlier, with the COVID situation and how we manage all of that. But also, we can now enroll low-income residents into community solar farms. There's now a unified billing between CCA and the utility. There's a workaround now with NYSEG for getting the gross receipts tax payments to the cities and villages, so it's not a huge budget hit for them. There still is, unfortunately, no bulk enrollment of CCA members into the Dryden Solar Farm or any other, and still separate billing. There's still renewable energy development. What I've learned in watching the PSC for years is that there's always new policies. There's always new changes. You know, now we have smart meters in Tompkins County, and they want to use time of use billing. And, you know, all of this is going to affect the landscape of how do we move forward. Low cost supply, still an ongoing issue. There are, of course, now several active CCAs, and we need to evaluate their programs, I think. There's a new consultant, or actually, as I mentioned, the term they prefer is an advisor to the community, which is Local Power. And again, they started CCA, developed their vision for it. Skipping down, the lack of transparency. Again, Local Power, feels like to me a more transparent approach, robust community engagement, prioritizing social and energy equity. In terms of local control, 3.0 is geared much more towards that. It has a broader focus. In terms of getting all of our municipalities to enroll, there's a possibility of changing this as we apply to the Public Service Commission to get authorization. But I think we also have to ask, do we want to, versus just have a coalition of the willing municipalities. And last, you know, of course, CCA is 3.0 is a new model. Is it possible perhaps to convert from 2.0, which is already existing, and over time convert to 3.0? And I don't know the answer to that. So with that, Terry, I think this last slide is yours.
Fantastic, thank you. So yeah, the last slide, I think before we get to question answers is probably a question a lot of you have is, so how does this really get started? And so we have a lot of the steps laid out here. But I think, what we have at the top, that public engagement piece is the overarching, thing that has to imbue basically every single one of these, and this is, in many senses, the first step of that is getting people informed about what CCA is so that they know what they're getting into. So information gathering, webinars like these, hopefully webinars that we'll have in the future, starting to set feasibility goals, or excuse me, set preliminary goals, and really starting to look at the feasibility, and then reevaluating those goals. And I'll say, and Irene will back me up, those first 4 bullets are basically what the working group, that first original working group that Irene headed, that's what they covered, was just those first 4. And they worked for over a year trying to figure things out. So it's not a short process, and as Irene said, it does take effort. Even the 1.0s and the 2.0s take effort, especially if you want to make sure that you're doing this right. But once you start to get through that, you feel firm in your conviction that this is the way you want to go. There's the ability to select an administrator, either through an RFP or, choosing one that you've had good conversations with. And then comes, a few steps that are basically required in order for you to be able to do this in the Public Service Commission's eyes. So the first is developing an implementation plan. So that's, coming up with, what the program is, the budget, what's your public outreach strategy going to be, because it has to be specifically a public outreach effort, purely based on the implementation plan and what it's going to be, even above and beyond some of the other things that may have been going on. There needs to be a data management plan that has to be submitted that's going to guarantee the safety and privacy of the data that you're collecting from your residents and customers. And then the municipality has to pass a local law, basically saying that this is something that they're going to take on, and certifying that this is something that they really want to pursue. All 3 of those, the data management plan, the implementation plan, and that local law from the municipality, all have to be submitted and approved by the Public Service Commission before it can move forward. Once it is approved, though, and part of this, happens throughout the process as well. You can start to aggregate with other municipalities. Some people leave this towards the end. Some people start this off at the very beginning. I think, we're very much more in favor of let's go with that mindset from the beginning. Once you have an idea of your customer base, how many people are going to be part of the aggregation, issuing the request for proposals for energy supply or any other services, reviewing what those proposals look like, revising if necessary, reissuing until you get one that you think works, hiring a local coordinator to do a lot of the behind the scenes work. I work with municipalities all the time. Many of you are municipal officials. No municipality has the time to take this on by themselves. So it's going to require, having someone to jump on board and really help lead these efforts. And, volunteers might be possible, but it might also require someone to actually be hired to do it. And then the launch itself, and making sure that people are aware of it and kept informed throughout the entire experience, even after the CCA is in existence. Those ones that you see with the green asterisks, they all have templates available. So there's a template, available via NYSERDA that I'm happy to distribute to people for, the implementation plan, the local law, how to come up with MOUs with an administrator, MOUs with other municipalities. And then finally, we've seen a couple of municipalities actually issue these RFPs to select an administrator, and I have access to those as well. And I'm happy to give those to people that might be interested. So, we've covered a lot. We have, about 9 minutes to answer some questions. I see some in the chat as well. I will add that if you have any additional questions that don't get brought up today or that occur to you after the fact, here's the contact information for both Irene and myself. I think both of us are very happy to answer any questions that there might be. And I guess without too much further ado, we'll spend the next couple minutes answering some questions, and then we have one more slide just in terms of the next step. So,
and Terry, I just want to suggest that as long as the Zoom doesn't automatically shut down, I regret that we're running a little long, but we can continue to do question and answer as long as people want to stay. And for those who have to leave, it'll be recorded and you can look into the rest of the question and answer that you weren't able to attend. So
Yeah.
I'd suggest that we try and do a little bit of that.
Yeah, so I'll have Theodora start to read out some of these questions, and then Irene and I will try and, bat them out one by one. I guess just because I see Joe's question in the chat, and because I am worried that people are gonna have to leave right at 5, let me just jump to this last slide real quick, which is really the next steps. So for people that are interested in, this ongoing effort, this webinar has really piqued your interest. This is something that you really wanna work on. The TCOG Energy Committee has a meeting this upcoming Thursday to talk about the next steps. These are some of the things that are on the agenda that are going to be talked about. I think there's going to be ongoing conversations in regards to this. But the last thing, that I think is really important is to really start talking about this with other people. So if you're a municipal official, you sit on a town board, a village, board, a city, common council, or if you're just in a committee, start having these conversations with each other. Try and get people to either watch this recording or go through the slides, try and find out what CCAs are. The only way this is going to happen if people start to become informed about this and there becomes enough of a groundswell that people really see this as something that wants to happen. So Irene, anything to add on this slide, or should we jump into questions?
I think that's good. Let's jump into questions.
All right. So Theodora, why don't you start us off with some questions here?
Yeah, so I'm going to read these from the Q&A section, and then there were a couple questions in the comments that I'll get to after. So our first question is from Kirby, and he is asking how are jobs created?
All right, I think this is in regards to how can CCAs help create jobs, and maybe connected to that 3.0 model. So Irene, do you want to try and take a stab at this?
Sure, and I don't want this to be the complete answer. I think it's generically looking to hire local companies to build whatever renewables get built, potentially. Just like we have with the water treatment plant and the wastewater treatment plant, is we actually have local people hired to run it and manage it and do the billing and provide customer relations and whatever else is involved in running the program. So there could be jobs created both to build the renewables, to develop and run the program in all kinds of administrative levels. So that's the answer I have right now. And I want to point out that I'm not an expert on CCA 3.0. Paul Fenn and Julia have been in touch and are interested to work with our community. So I'd like to think that we could invite them to ask these questions and hear their answers rather than mine. So don't take anything that I say as a definitive, but it's at least to whet your appetite.
And that brings up another good point, is if there's topics that we didn't cover today that you would love to see covered in a future webinar, such as bringing Paul and Julie, please let us know, and we'll definitely try and work to make that happen. Theodora, what else do we have?
Yeah, so the next question is, does the PSC still require the CCA energy price as average between brown and green options, or is it lower than the utility NYSEG default?
Yeah, so this is a good question. Irene, do you want to try and take a stab at this, or do you want me to do it?
I'd like you to answer if you know, because I don't know the answer. And I just want to let people know that Sarah was part of the committee that looked into this before. And this was another piece of the picture, is that the PSC was requiring the energy price to be equal or lower than the utility.
Yeah, so like Irene, I don't know the definitive answer for this, but I will say, having looked at a couple of the annual reports from Westchester Power and seen some of the initial numbers from some of the other CCAs, I trend towards thinking that this isn't a requirement, since some of the CCAs have definitely averaged at a price that's higher than the default utility rate. So we can definitely look in and get a definitive answer for you on that, Sarah.
Well, and again, I want to point out that this is to launch our exploratory within the community about doing CCA. So, it doesn't necessarily, Terry, have to be you delivering the answer instantly, but hopefully we'll have a work group that, again, starts to dig in and learn and answer questions, and we can inform each other.
Yeah.
The next question is it possible to graduate from one model to another? I.e., if you start with 1.0, move to 2.0, and finally 3.0?
So that's, I think that's the question that we're all kind of wondering. And this is something that Irene and I have definitely gone back and forth on. I tend to be optimistic and think that it is possible. But I think, as Irene has pointed out to me, pretty consistently, I think once you jump into one, there's definitely a danger of becoming entrenched. And so I think if you go into a 1.0 or a 2.0 and know that the reason you're doing that is because you have an eventual end goal of, a 3.0, for instance, then I think it's more likely to happen. But, 3.0 hasn't happened anywhere yet. So I think, it's pretty unclear at this point whether you can transition from a 2.0 to a 3.0. But, Westchester Power, I think, has demonstrated that at least from a 1.0 to a 2.0, you can start to make that shift gradually.
Right, right. And it is still a challenge to them. And, I don't know, again, in a community basis, whether we want to start with really having our goal be just buying cheaper energy, even if it's brown energy. And again, with our supply costs here, whether that's achievable. So, it's a good question, Kirby, and definitely, again, stuff that we should explore if there's interest in the, looking into CCA for our community. I'd also point people to Jerry Wiley's answer, I presume, to Kirby's question. Jerry has really spent a lot of time digging into looking at various energy supplies for CCAs and for utilities, and is quite knowledgeable on this. And so I think her answer is quite informative as well. So
and she's also probably one of the only people on this webinar that lives in a CCA right now. So she lives in a municipality that has adopted a CCA. So she's definitely a resident expert, I guess you could call it.
Yeah, true.
All right, the next question. Currently one can contract from an ESCO and subscribe to a community solar project. If a local solar project were the ESCO, how would this change?
My answer to that is, Jerry, you're super sophisticated in this, and I think that's beyond the kind of question that we can answer now. I think that a lot of people are going to have to understand what is an ESCO and what would it mean for a community solar project to subscribe and become the ESCO. So again, good kind of question for us to chew on as we move forward in looking into CCA.
Yeah, and I'll say that we didn't realize that no one else could see Jerry's answer to the question in the Q&A. So I just put that in the chat so people could see what her earlier answer was regarding the transition from 1.0 to 2.0 to 3.0 is.
Oh, only us, we're the only ones who can see the question and answer?
At least one person couldn't see it, so I put it in the chat. We're still learning this. This is our first time using the Zoom webinar platform. Hopefully it's gone somewhat smoothly.
All right, the next question. Where does the money come from to do the local work and hire a coordinator?
Another good question. With the last time we looked into this, Kirby, the money for the, there are two people that are looking to be paid. One is the administrator, and another is that if you're going to have a local coordinator paying them. And at the time that we looked into it, it was both to be done through a surcharge on the negotiated price that you got through the RFP, that I forget what it was, whether it was 10% or something tacked on to, so if you got a price of, let's say, 3 cents per kilowatt hour in your contract, you could add in up to something that would raise it up to the average of 0.38 cents per kilowatt hour, whatever, some formula to use. And we'd have to look into where it is now. Amy, I see, wants to know, is NYSERDA offering incentives to do this? And there are some starting to happen, whether it could go towards supporting a local coordinator, remains to be seen. But
so, and I guess this is my chance to plug. So the Clean Energy Communities program that I mentioned that I coordinate, the first iteration of it came with a lot of grants for municipalities. We brought over $1 million into Tompkins County for clean energy actions through that program. Almost every municipality in Tompkins County is a designated clean energy community. We are starting to believe that there's going to be a second iteration of that program, hopefully with money for communities as well. And if that comes to pass, then this is definitely an opportunity to maybe start to explore how those funds could be used.
Our next question asks, how do you see the outlook for a 100% CCA changing with the CLCPA state goals and mandates, or even with the influx of community solar?
Yeah, this is a fantastic question. I think if you look at the CLCPA goals, getting to 100% renewables, for electricity supply is still decades away. So if we want to get there sooner than that, I think CCAs are definitely part of that. And I think the other part is, coming back to what Irene was talking about with that, the 3.0 model, 100% renewables for New York State in the CLCPA doesn't mean that those renewables are going to necessarily be local and that the that the community is going to see those benefits. And similarly, there's no guarantee that we're going to see some of the programs related, to energy efficiency and job creation, through the CLCPA, at least locally, without, a vehicle like CLCPA. And then the last part is there's no guarantee that CLCPA isn't going to start to push the issue a little bit more with CCAs, either through adding some of those incentives that Amy was asking about, or, some other methods that they could look at. I don't see CCA ever being mandated, but there definitely are ways for them to incentivize. Irene, do you have any thoughts?
Well, first of all, I just want to sort out the alphabet soup for those who don't know what CLCPA is. CLCPA is a climate law that was passed this past year, and it stands for the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, and it takes what had been just sort of vague goals that the state had but never felt obligated to uphold, and actually puts them into law to uphold the renewable energy goals that the state has set, and it actually has also accelerated what those goals will be. And so there is a vision now that by 2040, we'd be at 40% renewable, and by 2050, we'd be at 80% renewables in the state. Sorry, did I say 2040? 2030 to reach 40%, and 2050 to reach 80%. So it's an ambitious goal. The state is going to need to figure out where to go with that. I had mentioned earlier that state policies are changing. They actually just now have passed a new renewable energy siting law, which is potentially going to shift things over the next year or more from community-based, what's on the distribution part of the grid, community solar farms, and to larger scale installations, what are called utility scale, which would be 20, 30, 50, 80, 100 megawatt solar farms that get sold into the wholesale transmission grid. And so questions about whether community choice programs can buy out of the wholesale market, or again, how we could structure ourselves to be able to have access to those kind of projects. And honestly, question is, are those the kind of projects we would want for our community, or would we want the locally owned ones? So again, more questions than answers at this point, I think, but they're good questions. And I think they're questions that are worth digging into and thinking through again to see if perhaps now CCA is a fit for us, and which model of CCA feels like most fit for us. And so we can certainly, over the coming weeks, talk to different program administrators, talk to different communities, talk to people at NYSERDA who are overseeing the work that the various CCAs that now exist, overseeing how it's going for them, and learn about whether or not this is something that becomes a direction that's will help us realize the goals that we set.
All right, we have two more questions in the chat really quick. One, is it feasible to think about developing municipal electric companies in our county? Own and control distribution as well, or is CCA really our best bet?
Well, Kareem, we anticipated a question like this. We even added a slide just to be prepared for it. So I'll let Irene kind of go through this. But I'll say thank you all for staying a little bit later. We got this question and then one more, and then we'll let you all go. So Irene, go ahead.
Yeah, and hopefully this slide is a little bit self-explanatory. CCA, as you've heard us talk about it today, in itself is an involved process. It's not just a cookie cutter, easy to jump into, let's go do it kind of project. We need to figure out a variety of things about what we want to do, how we want to, procure, and then, face the challenge of, does our RFP actually deliver what we want it to? So CCAs are involved with procuring your own energy supply, perhaps providing energy related services, and they're authorized by a local law at the lowest level of municipality. And then I guess I should have added in, needs to be approved by the Public Service Commission. On the becoming a municipal utility involves, in addition to procuring your own energy supply and perhaps providing energy services, it requires a county local law to be passed, plus a ballot initiative that gets put to a vote of everybody in the county, and then it gets authorized by the state legislature. The difference with a municipal utility is that in addition to dealing with your energy supply, you have the possibility, the choice of owning and maintaining also the delivery system, the wires, the substations, the transformers. You don't have to do it, it's not required, but if you do become authorized as a municipal utility, that is an option to undertake. I think that at some point, I would think that converting from a CCA to a municipal utility is something that could be considered further down the road. My own personal opinion is that it's a big enough project just to think about how to implement a CCA without starting to think about how to also own and manage the delivery system. But it's something that could be considered, in my opinion, would be better to consider at a later date.
And I'll add, in California, where, as I said, CCA started and is really, leading on the forefront, a lot of the CCAs there are now starting to think about taking over those poles and wires. So, that is maybe a step for a future time. But yeah, I think for now, let's focus on CCA.
Yeah, hey, if we hear a lot of pushback from the community and they want to go even more ambitious, it's something our committee could consider. But in my opinion, it's a big enough piece to chew on just to work on CCA.
That's true. All right, I think we have one more, Theodora.
Yeah, the last question was more about facilitation, just asking people if they're comfortable with sharing emails for people to continue the conversation.
Yeah, so that's definitely something I'll mull on. Like I said, we'll send out an email after this with a slide on the website where people can find out more information, and I'll include some of these next steps, and I'll definitely try and figure out how we can do that, Sarah. So thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, and I would say too that the TCOG Energy Committee meeting was already scheduled for this Thursday, so we just stuck with it. At the time that it was scheduled because the plan was that the committees would meet every other month, and then the full board of TCOG would meet on the alternate months. But so every other month right now, Thursday afternoon at 3 will conflict with TCOG's monthly or every other month meeting. And so likelihood is that we'll be looking to find a new date and time for the Energy Committee. And the Energy Committee will be focusing on CCA. So I think that, as we're figuring that out, we can send a whatever it is, a doodle link or, however we figure out when to hold that meeting. And we do envision not just doing webinars like this, but actually Zoom meetings that have conversations that we can coordinate and do more of the exploration and sharing with each other, because this really is ultimately about developing a community project with community interaction at its core. So, so we absolutely look forward to finding ways to join people together while we socially distance, and to at least, you know, what would be really nice is to lay the groundwork for this, so that when distancing is you know, in our past, we've got ways to start to help build an economy that thrives. So.
All right. Well, with that, I want to thank everyone that attended. You know, this was our first time, like I said, running one of these Zoom webinars, and I feel like it went fairly well. So we're really happy with that. I hope to continue this conversation with many of you. I'll throw up on the screen one last time our contact information. If you have suggestions for future webinars, you know, definitely let us know what you'd like to see, what information you'd like to cover. Come to that meeting on Thursday. We can talk about it there as well. And stay happy, stay healthy, stay safe. All right. Thank you all. And thanks, Irene.
I'm just typing an answer to Ann right now. Ann Rhodes had asked, can we let people know who is on this call so that they can talk to each other? And my answer to that is that we'll get permission from people to share their names.
All right. Thank you all. Have a great night.
Yeah, thanks.